Okay, let's continue with this example, and let's just summarize again where we stopped. So far we know that under autarky, if the two countries wouldn't trade with each other, the United States would be able to consume 4 hot dogs and Canada 2. Okay, so now David Ricardo introduced the concept of a comparative cost advantage. And the idea of a comparative cost advantage already incorporates the idea of marginalism. And David Ricardo asked the question, what are the marginal opportunity cost of producing 1 extra bun? Okay, so if we take the United States, what are the opportunity cost of producing 1 extra bun? So let's just assume the United States currently produces 7 links and 1 buns. So let's say the United States is producing here, just randomly selected. And if the United States now decides to produce not 1 bun, but 2 buns, then, so if the United States decides to produce 1 extra bun, well, how many units of links does it have to give up? Well, -1. And it doesn't matter if I do that here, even if the United States produced, let's say, 3 links and 5 buns, if I want to produce from this point 1 extra bun plus 1, I can only do so if I give up a link. And of course that is related to our workers, because if I want to produce 1 extra bun, I have to take away 1 worker from the links and send them to the buns. And since 1 worker can produce either 1 link or 1 bun, the opportunity cost is 1 foregone link. Okay, and of course, maybe you have already sensed or felt that if you take a look at this slope, what is the slope of this ppf? So the slope of the ppf is, for the USA, slope USA ppf is equal to -1. So the slope of the ppf immediately tells you the marginal opportunity cost of producing whatever you display on the x-axis. So the -1 tells you that the marginal opportunity cost of producing an extra unit of bun for the United States is negative or 1 foregone link. Okay, so now let's take a look at what the opportunity costs are for an extra bun for Canada. So let's assume, let's take maybe this point here. Let's assume Canada produces at this dot 2 and 2. And now Canada decides, for whatever reason, I want to produce 1 extra unit of bun. Plus 1. Well then, how many links does Canada have to give up? Well, the answer is only -0.5. So, and again, we can do that here. So if we go 1 to the right, we always have to give up half a link. So the opportunity cost of producing 1 extra bun is 0.5 foregone link. So now David Ricardo said that Canada has a comparative advantage in producing buns, because when Canada produces one extra bun, it needs to forgo very little link. So it's relatively cheap for Canada to produce a bun. So the conclusion is, from what we have done so far, that Canada has a comparative cost advantage in buns because the marginal opportunity cost of an extra bun in terms of foregone links is cheaper in Canada. Okay, so now what about the opportunity cost of producing an extra link? Let's start again with the United States. So let's say the United States currently produces here. So it uses up all its workers and it produces 5 links and 3 buns. But now the United States want to produce an extra link, so +1, then it needs to give up a bun. So that's -1. And again, I could do that on every point on that curve, we'll get the same result. So, because let's say if the United States currently produced 6 buns and 2 links, and it wants to produce 3 links, then it would have to give up, again, -1 bun. So the opportunity cost of producing 1 extra link is, for the United States, again, 1 foregone bun. Okay, so now let's move to Canada. So if Canada, for example, produces here 4 units of bun and 1 unit of link. If Canada wants to produce 2 units of link, so wants to produce 1 more, then, so +1 link, then it has to give up 2 buns. And again, that would be the same on every point. So again, if we use the trick with the slope, so the Canadian slope is, so the slope PPF Canada, slope Canada PPF is equal to -0.5. So this -0.5 tells you if Canada wants to produce 1 extra bun, it has to give up half a link. This is what you see here. Okay, but if we take the inverse and we ask what is the opportunity cost of producing 1 extra link, then it is the inverse of the slope, so it would be -2. So in other words, the slope tells us the marginal opportunity cost of foregone things on the y-axis if you want to produce 1 extra thing, which is being displayed on the x-axis. So because we have displayed on the x-axis buns, the slope of -0.5 tells us if we want to produce 1 extra bun, we have to give up half a link. But if I ask what's the marginal opportunity cost of producing 1 extra link, then that would be -2 buns, so we have to look at the inverse of the slope. Okay, maybe that takes a little bit of practice, but I think if you look at it maybe again after a little break, I think it will become clear. So So now we know that the marginal opportunity cost of producing one extra link for Canada is 2 foregone bonds. Okay, so the slope of the PPF is very informative about the marginal opportunity cost. So now, because the United States has to give up only 1 bond for every link, but Canada has to give up 2 bonds for every link, we will say that the United States has a comparative cost advantage in links. Okay, so that is very important, that when you see 2 PPFs, what you need to be able to identify is which country has a comparative cost advantage in what. And what helps is to make such a little table here and read it off the table. But if you work with such models more often, you just can immediately tell from looking at the PPF that because Canada's PPF is flatter than the United States PPF, then we can immediately say that Canada has a comparative advantage in bonds and the United States has a comparative advantage in links. So, okay, I hope it's not too complicated and maybe takes a little bit of practice, but this is very important. So we need to, what we do is, in identifying comparative cost advantages, is we look at the marginal opportunity cost. And those marginal opportunity costs are reflected already in the slope of the PPF. But to be always on the safe side, it's good to make a table like this. Okay, so I'll stop here for now, and then we move to the next topic, which is the topic of how should countries specialize. And of course the answer will be countries should specialize in the good in which they have a comparative cost advantage. But there's a little bit more to it, but I will talk about that in the next video, and I'll stop here.